In the UFC, it can be challenging to bounce back after a difficult defeat. Your worst nightmares come true in the most visible of circumstances. You also don't get to go out and re-establish yourself a week later with the intention of getting even as in other sports. However, the outcome of their second chance wasn't exactly what these fighters had hoped for. Here are 10 warriors that attempted to exact revenge but were unable to do so. They are listed in no specific order. Number 10. Israel Adesanya's Alex Pereira. A recent entry comes in first, courtesy of epic middleweight title fight between Israel Adesanya and his rival, Alex Pereira. It was a fight several years in the making, one that took the kickboxing rivalry and leveled it up for MMA audiences. Alex Pereira had, of course, scored 2 victories over Israel Adesanya back in the ring, the second of which being that legendary highlight reel KO. But heading into UFC 281, there was an expectation that Adesanya was about to give his rival a rude awakening on the levels that exist within MMA. And for the majority of the 5 rounds they spent in the octagon, Adesanya did just that, but history, as we all know, has a real habit of repeating itself. And despite being behind on the scorecards, Alex Pereira managed to turn the tide dramatically in the final minutes, catching Adesanya clean and finishing the fight via TKO, winning UFC gold and denying Adesanya his chance at revenge. Number 9. Barao's Dillashaw. Barao was likely caught off guard just as much as the rest of us when the unlikely contender Dillashaw turned up on short notice at UFC 173 and put on the performance of a lifetime to steal away Hennon's bantamweight title. Some thought it was a fluke, but looking back on it, it's hard to understand why. Dillashaw elevated his game to another level entirely on that night, dominating Barao for all 5 rounds and showing himself to be a far superior fighter. And the rematch. Well, to be honest, though the shock wasn't as heavy, Dillashaw was just as good as before, putting yet another beatdown on the former champion and sending him into a pretty steep career decline. Number 8. Conor McGregor's Dustin Poirier. Conor McGregor had 7 long years to cherish his initial victory over Dustin Poirier at UFC 178. 7 years that Poirier spent improving himself into the lightweight elite, acquiring the skills he would need to eventually beat McGregor in the rematch. But despite hitting a real wall in the form of the diamond, Conor McGregor didn't bother with a rebound fight. Just a few months later, the notorious one demanded another shot at Poirier, and this time, there was some next-level bad blood going in. However, despite his strong opening to the round, Poirier quickly started to find his rhythm, getting the better of his rival once again before a freak injury saw McGregor's leg give out from underneath him. Sure, it may not have been a definitive ending, but it has to be considered a failure within the context of this video. Number 7. Daniel Cormier's Jon Jones. Out of all of the fighters listed here, we have a feeling that no single win would mean more to any other athlete than beating Jon Jones would mean to Daniel Cormier. Not only had these two engaged in one of the most fierce rivalries in the history of the sport, but DC had his original chance at redemption taken from him just hours out from UFC 200 after Jones tested positive for a banned substance. Cormier had put his heart and soul into that training camp, and it only served to build the animosity with Jones heading into their rematch. Unfortunately, Jones had more than a few tricks up his sleeve, and once the 3rd round came, he set up a brutal fight-ending sequence, landing a head kick that led to a TKO. Sure, the win would be turned over later on due to Jon Jones testing positive yet again, but despite 2 attempts, DC never managed to get a win over his great rival. Number 6. Cody Garbrandt vs. Dillashaw. Cody Garbrandt is one of MMA's biggest oddities. For one night against Dominic Cruz, he looked like the greatest fighter on the planet. A slick, methodical, and elusive striker who could barely put a foot wrong. But ever since then, his recklessness and his chin have been real issues for the former champion. And though he certainly did well against his great rival TJ Dillashaw in their first fight, nearly finishing him at the end of the 1st round, he ultimately got caught in the 2nd, losing by way of TKO. So the rematch came around. There was an expectation that Cody Garbrandt could get it all back with a few minor adjustments. Instead, TJ Dillashaw caught him early, finishing the fight inside of 1 round. And it's pretty safe to say that the love hasn't been the same since. Number 5. Petr Yan's Aljamain Sterling. Petr Yan managed to immortalize himself at UFC 259 for becoming the first champion to lose their belt by way of disqualification when he kneed Aljamain Sterling in the face while he was grounded. Prior to the stoppage, Yan was winning the fight pretty comfortably, which makes his decision all the more baffling. But when Sterling was booked for a rematch against the former champion, the general consensus was that Petr Yan was about to restore order at 135 pounds. However, Sterling turned up for the rematch with a much better game plan, using his takedowns and incredible back control to steal 3 of the 5 rounds, successfully defending his title. It wasn't the prettiest performance you'll ever see, but Sterling deserves all the credit in the world for upsetting the odds. Number 4. Rich Franklin v. Anderson Silva. Rich Franklin is probably one of the more underrated champions to compete in the UFC, and it's a real shame that most people know him best for his first loss to Anderson Silva, a fight that saw the Spider capture the middleweight title with a brutal finish. Franklin was well and truly dominated by Silva on that night, battered by some vicious knees that led to a first-round stoppage. And the rematch, well, there's an argument to be made that Rich Franklin did slightly better, especially considering that he survived until the second round. But that's all you can really say on a positive note. Once again, Silva ran through Franklin with relative ease, putting their rivalry to bed with an exclamation point. Number 3. Max Holloway v. Alexander Volkanovski. Alexander Volkanovski may have gone 3-0 over Max Holloway, but let's be clear, that second fight was just about as close of a contest as you'll ever see. And judging by the pair of knockdowns that Max scored early on, there was a sense that the former champion had done enough to regain his title after getting shut down in their first fight. But the judges gave the nod to Volkanovski instead, leading Holloway back to the drawing board. And to his credit, he rebounded nicely, putting on a pair of great performances before earning his way back to a trilogy fight. Unfortunately, this time, Volkanovski put some considerable distance between himself and the Hawaiian, leaving him in a tough spot coming into 2023. Number 2. Chad Mendes v. Jose Aldo. When Chad Mendes earned his first shot at UFC Gold, it couldn't have gone much worse. An attempt at securing Jose Aldo's back left him open for a huge knee to the face that ended his night before it had even started. Armed with an ever-improving striking game though, courtesy of Dwayne Ludwig's work at Team Alpha Male, Mendes went 5-0, showcasing a huge change in his stand-up game. Eventually, this rising contender could be denied no longer. A rematch with Aldo was set up for UFC 179, and despite his disastrous first attempt, their second meeting resulted in one of the greatest featherweight title fights of all time. Both men had major moments and kept a ridiculous pace throughout all 5 rounds. And though Aldo got the victory in the end on another night with another set of judges, it could have very well gone in favor of Chad Money Mendes. Number 1. Colby Covington v. Kamaru Usman. Colby Covington could have been born into any other era at 170 pounds, with the exception of GSP's and Usman's, and he'd likely be the champion of the world. But unfortunately, for as much as he has repeatedly proven himself to be the number 2 guy in the world, his first shot at Kamaru Usman's belt, though competitive, ended with a brutal stoppage late in the 5th round. But to his credit, he rebounded nicely, showcasing himself as a fighter who was willing to evolve. However, the rematch, while still competitive, once again saw Covington come up short, unable to find the type of momentum needed to get past the champion. Sure, Colby Covington is still a major player within the welterweight's top 5, but he'll certainly have his work cut out for him to make another run at the belt, especially if Kamaru Usman and Leon Edwards run it back, and with Kazmat Chumav in the title mix as well. As always, if you guys enjoyed the video, please be sure to let me know by leaving a like and subscribing to our channel. Apart from that, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.